I'm Elena Morales. I'm 62 years old, a retired elementary school teacher living in Tucson, Arizona. I came to this country when I was 20, speaking just enough English to survive, but enough Spanish to remember exactly who I was and where I came from. My son, Daniel, is the light of my life. I raised him on my own after his father passed when Daniel was just a baby. He grew up to be kind, thoughtful, and just a little too trusting for his own good. So when he told me he was bringing his new girlfriend over for dinner, I tried to be open-minded. Her name was Sophia. Pretty name, pretty girl, maybe too pretty. But I smiled, cooked enough food to feed a small army, and waited. Sophia arrived with flowers, compliments, and a voice as smooth as café con leche. She called me Mrs. Morales, said how much she'd heard about me. She hugged me like she meant it. But I've lived long enough to know that warmth can be faked, and when the performance is too perfect, there's usually something hiding behind the curtain. It happened when she thought I'd stepped out to refill the water pitcher. I was just around the corner, near the hallway, when I heard her voice. She was on the phone, speaking fast in Spanish, like someone who believed she had total privacy. Her words slid out casually, a little too familiar, and then I heard it. She's just an old fool. She won't be a problem. I didn't drop the pitcher. I didn't gasp or storm in. I stood there quietly, letting the words hang in the air like thick smoke. Then I walked back into the room, smile perfectly intact, and asked if anyone wanted more guacamole. She smiled at me with those big brown eyes. I smiled right back, but inside me, something cracked open. Not rage. Not yet. Something quieter and colder, like ice sliding beneath the surface. I've been underestimated before. People see gray hair and gentle eyes, and they assume you're harmless. They assume you stopped learning the moment you stopped working. What Sophia didn't know is that I was born and raised in Oaxaca. Spanish is not just my first language. It is my mother's lullaby, my father's pride, my history. I might speak English with a hint of desert wind now, but Spanish lives in my bones. Sophia, for all her poise, made the mistake of forgetting that. She called me an old fool. I smiled and passed the tortillas. I was raised to show grace in front of guests. But as I watched her wrap my tamales with those polished hands, I already knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about me. It was about Daniel. About every sacrifice I ever made to raise him right. If she thought I was going to sit quietly while she smiled in my face and planned whatever game she was playing, then she picked the wrong old fool, and that was the moment everything changed. Sophia had the kind of charm that disarmed you before you realized it. She complimented the color of my tablecloth like it was a silk tapestry, helped herself to setting the table with the confidence of someone raised in a warm kitchen, and even offered to warm the tortillas before I could stop her. There was something about the way she moved through my home that made it feel like she'd been there before, like she belonged. She spoke fondly of her childhood in Mexico City, the way her abuela made chilaquiles on Sunday mornings, how her father used to dance with her in the living room to old rancheras. She asked about my parents, my childhood in Oaxaca, and my journey to the States. Not in the polite, rehearsed way people sometimes do. She listened like she cared. Daniel was glowing. I hadn't seen him that relaxed in years. He laughed more that night than he had in months, leaning toward Sophia every time she spoke, his hand brushing hers without thinking. I watched him and felt something shift in me. Maybe I'd been too guarded. Maybe love still found its way into people's lives when they least expected it. She helped me carry dishes to the sink, rolled up her sleeves like it was nothing, told me my mole tasted like home. Her eyes were warm, her smile as easy. And for a moment, I wanted to believe it all. I wanted to believe that this woman, this elegant, confident, thoughtful young woman, was exactly who she claimed to be. There's something dangerous about hope at my age. It doesn't come often, and when it does, it wraps itself around your heart like soft thread. You tell yourself you've seen too much to be fooled, but there's still that part of you that wants to be wrong about your suspicions. I stood at the sink, rinsing plates, while Sophia dried them beside me, and I almost let myself picture her sitting at this table every Sunday, maybe even holding a grandchild someday. When dinner was over and Daniel stepped outside to take a work call, Sophia's phone rang. She excused herself and stepped into the hallway, speaking Spanish quickly and low. I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone deserves privacy. But something in her tone made me pause. It was clipped, businesslike, not the affectionate rhythm I'd heard earlier. I couldn't hear much, just a few stray words. Something about timing, about opportunity, and a soft laugh that didn't match the sweetness she'd worn all evening. I looked at the plate in my hands and suddenly felt its weight. It was the smallest crack. But once I noticed it, I couldn't stop seeing it. Still, I shook it off. Told myself I was imagining things, that I was being too protective. Maybe I was just nervous to share Daniel with someone new. Sophia returned to the kitchen a minute later, with that same calm grace, as if nothing had shifted. She picked up a towel and went back to drying the dishes, and I forced a smile, trying to quiet the flutter in my chest. Because a part of me still wanted to believe. I needed to believe. But something inside had already started to wake up. A whisper, a warning, and it would not be silenced for long. I hadn't meant to listen. I was just walking back from the laundry room with a fresh towel when I heard her voice echo softly down the hallway. She was speaking Spanish again, fast and fluid, but with none of the warmth from earlier. I stopped just before turning the corner. Her words were sharp, clinical. She said Daniel was sweet, gullible even, and that he would do anything to keep her happy. She called me harmless, said I was easy to manage, that if she smiled and complimented my cooking a few more times, I'd be practically begging for her to marry my son. My chest went tight. I pressed my back against the wall and closed my eyes, listening. She talked about the house. It was bigger than she expected. Daniel had mentioned his father's life insurance. She laughed low and pleased, said the inheritance angle would be the easiest. Americans were sentimental about family legacy. She laid it all out. Marriage by summer. Green card shortly after. Divorce within 2 years, before anything got messy. She'd keep it clean, quick, and quiet. Enough time to get what she needed, and walk away with papers in hand. She called it a plan, a perfect one. My hand gripped the towel like a lifeline. I felt the edges of the world tilt just a little. My son, the baby I raised, the man I taught to be kind, was being played like a fool, and he didn't even see it. She didn't love him. She wasn't even pretending to love him. He was just a step in her strategy. I stood there for another minute, listening to her voice drift off into silence. Then I turned back toward the kitchen, moving slowly, my breath held tight in my throat. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just kept walking. I folded the towel, placed it by the sink, and went on setting the table like nothing had changed. But everything had, and I would never see her the same again. After that night, I started watching her differently. Every smile, every sweet gesture, every time she called me mama, with that soft lilt in her voice. It all felt rehearsed. Her mask didn't slip, not even once, but mine did. I nodded along to her stories, laughed when she made jokes, and held her hand during family prayer, like nothing had changed. But behind my eyes, I was tracking details. What time does she arrive? What perfume does she wear? How many times has she mentioned marriage in casual conversation? When Daniel wasn't around, I sat at my kitchen table late into the night, scrolling through her social media. Her profiles looked perfect. Too perfect. Mostly photos from the last year. No old friends, no family tagged. Every image looked curated, like a brochure for a life she wanted people to believe. I called my niece Carla, who works for USCIS, and asked her a few questions. Nothing official, just general stuff about immigration timelines and how fraud cases are handled. Carla didn't ask too many questions. She's smart. She knows when to listen. As the days passed, patterns started to emerge. Sophia's answers about her job in Mexico changed slightly depending on who asked. The name of the company shifted once. Her accent Mexican, but not from any region I could pin down, slipped just once when she spoke to someone from Veracruz. Her paperwork, When I peeked at it in Daniel's office drawer, looked legitimate, but something about it felt thin. I wasn't ready to accuse anyone. Not yet. But I was gathering puzzle pieces, laying them out one by one, and as each one fell into place, the picture became clearer. This wasn't just a girl in love. This was a performance, and I had just stepped into the audience. I didn't want to involve anyone else. But there comes a point when intuition needs backup. So I hired a private investigator named Tomas Navarro, a quiet man in his 50s who spoke like a priest and moved like a shadow. He wasn't cheap, but he was thorough. Within a week, he handed me a folder that chilled me more than any phone call ever could. He started with immigration records. Sophia entered the U.S. on a tourist visa 8 months ago, listed a short-term rental in Phoenix as her address, then vanished from that system. He traced online activity, social connections, and digital fingerprints I wouldn't know how to find. Her LinkedIn was a ghost town. Her Facebook had only surface-level posts, no childhood friends, no tagged family, no real past. Her ID matched her face, but the name didn't stick. Tomas found 2 other aliases she'd used in different states over the past 3 years. He showed me a photo of her with a man outside a courthouse in Nevada. Same face. Different name. Married. Divorced. In under a year. In Colorado. Another photo. Another man. Same story. The settlements were small but consistent. A pattern. A strategy. Then came the worst part. Tomas found encrypted conversations on a forum tied to visa scams. Sophia, if that was her name, had posted under an anonymous account, asking for recommendations on lawyer templates, state loopholes, and how to manage timelines for green card interviews. She was coached, and she wasn't working alone. He believed she was connected to a ring that specialized in marriage fraud. They targeted vulnerable men, used emotional narratives, and moved city to city with different names, different backstories. The group took a percentage of everything earned, through settlement or shared assets. It was organized, clean, and hard to prosecute. I sat at my kitchen table with the folder open, hands steady but cold. This wasn't about jealousy or overprotection. This was criminal, and she had picked my son as her next target. That night, I didn't cry. I made tea, sat in the dark, and wrote down every single date, name, and detail Tomas had found. Because I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was preparing for war. I invited them for dinner like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sophia said her parents had just arrived from Mexico and were eager to meet me. I told her it would be an honor, and that I'd make enchiladas the way my mother taught me, the way no one ever forgets. They arrived right on time, dressed in muted elegance, polite and polished. Her father kissed my hand, her mother hugged me warmly. Their Spanish was flawless, but wrong. Not in vocabulary, but in rhythm. The tone was European, clipped and formal, not the soft, earthy cadence of Mexican Spanish. It was like hearing a violin play the notes of a song meant for a guitar. I welcomed them in Spanish, my accent heavy with Oaxaca, thick with roots. Her father blinked once. Her mother paused just long enough to register something. Sophia's eyes darted between us. I kept smiling. During dinner, I asked about their hometown. They said Guadalajara. Then later, Veracruz. Small contradictions. Easy to miss if you weren't listening. But I was. I asked about Sophia's school years. Her mother said she studied ballet. Her father said music. I nodded. I brought up regional food, joked about spice levels, and mentioned ingredients only locals would know. They agreed too quickly, too eagerly. People who remember don't hesitate. People who lie memorize. Their answers were rehearsed. Sophia stayed quiet through most of it, smiled when expected, passed dishes with grace, but her hands trembled just once, when I switched suddenly into Nahuatl, a language my grandmother used when she didn't want neighbors to understand. Sophia didn't recognize it, but her mother flinched. That night as they left, Sophia kissed my cheek and thanked me for a beautiful evening. Her voice was calm. Her eyes were not. As the door closed behind them, I turned off the porch light and exhaled for the first time all night. They weren't her parents, and I had just confirmed everything I needed to know. The table was set for 3. I'd made tamales, rice with saffron, and a flan that took 3 hours to cool. I lit the candles like I always did when I wanted peace, though there would be none tonight. Sophia arrived on Daniel's arm, smiling as if nothing in the world could touch her. She hugged me sweetly, complimented the smell of the food, and asked how my day had been. I told her it was peaceful, that I had spent the day remembering old recipes. My voice didn't shake, my hands didn't tremble. Daniel was happy. Blind. He looked at her like she had hung the moon, completely unaware that everything he believed was about to collapse. We ate. Slowly. Talked about small things. She laughed in all the right places. Touched his arm at just the right moment. It was all so rehearsed, so perfect, it made my skin crawl. When dinner ended, she stood and thanked me again, saying she had to leave early for an early shift. I nodded. Walked her and Daniel to the door. Then, just as she reached for the handle, the porch light flashed twice. 2 agents stepped forward from the dark. Plain clothes, quiet authority. They said her name. Her real name. The one Daniel had never heard. She froze. Just for a second. Then, she smiled. And when she opened her mouth, her voice was nothing like the sweet, careful Spanish she'd used with us. It was crisp, clean, American. No accent, no softness. She looked at Daniel and said he was pathetic. That she'd seen him coming a mile away. That she picked him because he was the kind of guy who wants to be needed more than he wants to be loved. She turned to me and laughed, said I should have stayed in the kitchen where I belonged, that I could have lived out the rest of my life pretending I had a perfect little family. Then she looked back at Daniel, told him none of it was real. Not the dates, not the love, not even her name. And then she leaned in, just close enough, and said the thing that cracked him, that women like her didn't destroy men like him. They just revealed what was already broken. And now, she said, he'd never be able to trust again. Not a smile, not a kiss, not even himself. They cuffed her gently. She didn't resist, just winked at Daniel and walked down the porch like it was a runway. Like she'd already won. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the spot where she had been, as if he could rewind time and find a version of her that hadn't existed. I reached for his arm, but he pulled away. The door closed slowly behind us, and all the warmth in the house went cold. A few weeks after her arrest, I got a call from Tomas. He had followed a lead on Sophia's past that led to a sealed juvenile record in Texas. What he found wasn't a list of crimes, but a history of wounds no one had ever tried to heal. She had been placed in foster care at 14 after accusing her stepfather of abuse. The charges were dropped. The man disappeared. She bounced from home to home until she aged out of the system. No one came looking for her. No one followed up. Somewhere along the way, she stopped waiting to be rescued and learned to rescue herself. David read the report silently. When he finished, he didn't say a word, just stared out the window for a long time, jaw tight, hands still. He didn't forgive her, but he couldn't hate her either. And that, I think, hurt him more. I sat with him, not as someone who'd been right, but as someone who now understood the full weight of what we had seen. Sophia wasn't innocent, but she hadn't always been this woman either. Somewhere, long before she smiled at my son, someone broke her, and she never got a chance to heal. It didn't excuse what she did, but it made it harder to forget. Pain, when buried deep, can twist a person into something unrecognizable. And sometimes the villain in your story started as a child who was never believed. He packed quietly. No shouting, no questions. Just folded shirts, a worn jacket, and the book I gave him when he graduated college. I didn't stop him. I didn't ask where he was going. I already knew he needed to go somewhere I couldn't follow. He left the note on the kitchen counter. One sentence. "Thanks for trying, Mom." I read it once. Then again. The words were soft, but they hit harder than any argument we could have had. I sat down at the table, dinner still warm, untouched. The candles flickered and then went out. I stared at the chair where he always Saturday, where his laughter used to fill the room like sunlight. Now there was only quiet, thick and heavy like smoke after a fire. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because this kind of hurt sits too deep for tears. I told myself I did the right thing, that I protected him. That was the truth. No matter how cruel that was, it was better than a lifetime of lies. And I still believe that. But love doesn't always feel like safety. Sometimes it feels like loss. That night, I sat alone at the table, slowly chewing a bite of tamale gone cold. And I thought about how sometimes, even when you save someone, they still leave. Not because they don't love you, but because healing needs space and silence.